Hi, and welcome to Spiced Up Civics, your Minneapolis-based youth-led spin on a certain better-known YouTube series, where whether you're here for the poultry or the politics, we are really excited to have you. And we are joined today by Miles Wilson, who is running for Minneapolis City Council in Ward 5. He will be answering some spiced up questions while eating some spiced up food of choice, in this case, wings from The Kitchen by Baked Brand here in the Midtown Global Market. As always, we have a lineup of 5 hot sauces made right here in Minnesota, except for our last one, which was made from our neighbors in Wisconsin. First off, Logs hot sauce, then Crybaby Craig's, Burn Your Face from Lovejoy's, Red Eye hot sauce, and finally Hellfire Doomed from Wisconsin. So we are gonna dive right into this food and hot sauce, but first off, I want to ask Miles if you would be willing to introduce yourself and explain why you chose to run for office.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. Miles Wilson, born and raised in Minneapolis, specifically in the Ward 5 area, and that's where I'm running for council now. What kind of led me to run for politics and run for city council actually took place the last 2 elections, where I considered it at that time, but ultimately chose not to, just due to wanting to make sure that I was mentally, emotionally ready to kind of face the campaign trail. And then to, again, educate myself on what were some of the issues that the community was calling for. What were some of the resolutions that I could kind of work through and help create as I was preparing myself for that space. And so then last year, 2024, I decided to run, fully confident in my campaign, my why, my purpose. And so yeah, but yeah, so that's why I decided to run this election. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Well, we're gonna dive in and try our first hot sauce. This is Logs hot sauce. It is technically their ghost pepper variety, but when I last tried it, it was not that spicy. So I'm hoping that's still true. Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay. A little bit. How's that for you?
It's good. My father's side is Jamaican, so I grew up around spicy food my entire life. But that's good. I mean, it's a starter for sure.
I have to say, definitely hotter than I remember. So
Yeah.
we're about to go up at the start and then down a little bit, and then we'll come back up.
If that's a start, we'll see how it's going.
Your website talks a lot about your experience organizing with youth and my generation. So I'm curious if you could share a little bit more about that and why you think it's important to involve young people in politics.
Absolutely. So again, kind of going back to that purpose, that why. After the murder of George Floyd, a partner and I started the Young People's Task Force. At that time, we saw that there were a lot of voices that were through the city, and there were a lot of ways to express their emotions, from frustration to like cries for help. And what we noticed that at a lot of the tables that we see structurally in from a government perspective is that we're always left out of that space. So in a meeting after the murder of George Floyd, I was with the Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice. I was present for that meeting where I spoke on behalf of young people because I was the only one in that room at that time. But I also felt that was a little bit out of place. So we created the Young People's Task Force, where the concept was specifically around kind of rallying and organizing the voice of the young people. So we started off with what we call the community service conversations, where we went to different wards and different areas of the city to talk to young people about kind of how they felt about their areas. And I think that a lot of people wouldn't be surprised by the voice that was being said, is that they felt unheard, that they felt like there wasn't much for them to do. They didn't feel safe in their areas, but nobody was listening. And so from there, we started to build this team out, where we started to then kind of focus on creating events and spaces where they do have that voice and that platform, where we, kind of got them in front of things like the BCA, to understand what the BCA does. Held Martin Luther King Day events where we're, getting them in front of community leaders so they can learn more about their history. One of the bigger things that we were able to accomplish was that we found out that juvenile DNA was being taken by law enforcement. And at a time when we were working side by side, and still do work side by side with the Minneapolis Police Department leadership, we just felt that that was, if not illegal, morally unethical to collect juvenile DNA without a judge's warrant, or let alone consent from a parent, or from fear based out of from the young people. So we worked for 2.5, 3 years to work with legislators to make sure that we were writing a bill to pass into law, which is now into law as of August 1st, 2024, the protection of juvenile DNA. So the only way that law enforcement can take juvenile DNA is under a judge's warrant. And so, but that was all in the back of the voice of the young people. That wasn't something that we just thought that, that we experienced, but that was one of the voices. So that's where that work and why I feel that getting them included is important. So
thanks for sharing that and
Absolutely.
for that very crucial sounding work. We're going to move on to our next one.
Okay.
This is one that I think a lot of people are familiar with, Crybaby Craig's. Fallen since 2012. If you want to get started. Okay. Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay. Next question. What do you think is one of the most pressing issues facing Minneapolis? And why?
One of the bigger issues that I feel like is pressing Minneapolis is overall public safety. And that's just due to my scope of work from an organizational perspective of what I've seen personally. But the work that's being done to alleviate some of these public safety issues. And when I say public safety, as I'm talking to, especially out on the campaign trail now, going into some of these senior homes, talking to them and learning more about what's going on there. They talk about physical attacks happening in some of the spaces. They talk about security measures that aren't up to standard in some of these places. Young people, that's a whole nother thing after COVID, when the world went into a space of everybody kind of being at home, or being isolated and things closing down and not really reopening the way that serves the community. And when I say community, I just mean the city in general. But seeing that young people not having places to go. When I was young, I was able to go to, sorry, I guess it is a little bit hot.
You're good.
When I was young, going to places like the different parks, and being able to, meet my friends there to hang out, or be involved in different programs, whether it was working through the park system or after school or sports or whatever the case may be. I had options to basically keep myself busy, in a positive way. Young people aren't seeing that as much now, and so kind of taking a look from the bigger picture of saying, okay, we see that there's not much for them to do. They're in the homes. We're in a point where families are working 2 or 3 times or 2 or 3 jobs just to keep, their bills paid. And so a lot of times students or young people are left at home, and they're just in spaces where they're bored essentially. And what boredom creates is chaos. And I don't think that's at fault of the young people. I think that's where their voice does become important. But again, from an overall public safety perspective, I'm hearing it from our elders and seniors in our community who are vulnerable groups, our young people. And I think that, the plan or what we're kind of missing is a community base. I know that when we talk about public safety, we tend to think about the police aspect of public safety. And that's just one part of it, where we're asking for transformation and good policing, but getting back to a place where community can rely on each other. Again, kind of growing up, I think back to a time when after school, if I got out of school at 1:30 with my siblings, my parents worked till 5 or 6 o'clock, we had neighbors that served as kind of like, not a babysitter, but an additional set of eyes, you know what I mean? Where they trusted our neighbors to be able to kind of keep an eye on us. So if anything were to happen in the community, they could make that phone call to our parents. So kind of relying back on the community a little bit and working together for a holistic, safe, and healthy community. So,
What do you, as a city council member, want to do about that problem as you define it, of public safety?
yeah, I want to be creative and innovative about the solution. So I look at things through a holistic approach. And again, I know that in any kind of given part of the city, we're talking about rebuilding trust with the police department. There's that side of it, but also kind of going back to that community aspect. How do we get our community involved? How do we create spaces, jobs within the community that not only serve as skill-based and skill-building programs, because again, kind of going back to my childhood, I had the opportunity to work through Team Teamworks, which, if people aren't familiar, Team Teamworks was a program through the Park and Rec Board, and we basically just cleaned up the parks that you were assigned to, you know. But this created a place for me to meet new people, learn organizational and time management skills, leadership skills, communication skills as a young person. And so, but also in the same breath, holistically, I was doing something good for my community, where I was thinking of the parks. You know, I saw young people that, you know, were there playing, and they would ask us questions. They kind of looked at us as kind of that mentorship or that guidance about how to get involved. So I think creating these opportunities through like maybe green teams or creating, going back to the idea of elevating our neighborhood committees, where they're talking about what they're seeing in the community so that they can pass it on to their city council members and pass it on, you know, up forward and so that we can create these solutions together. So again, from a base of holistically looking at it from that residential, organizational, faith leader, business owner perspective, and creating these groups and spaces where we get open dialogue first before we create solutions together is where I was going with it. So
Thanks for sharing. I appreciate it. We're gonna move on to our next one. Lovejoy's Burn Your Face.
okay.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay. What do you think?
It's got good flavor. Tastes kind of like Tabasco a little bit, but with a little bit more flavor to it.
Yeah.
So
One of my favorite questions is,
Uh-huh.
what is your go-to restaurant here in the Twin Cities?
go to. It's a good question because it all depends on my mood. But like on any given day, I think pimentos, which is interesting. You know, well, one kind of going back to, you know, like that my family on my dad's side. You know, we're in a city that is very culturally diverse. And I kind of look for that because growing up, my grandmother, she lived on Park Avenue, so in Ward 8, and that would be the place that like my dad's side would always kind of gather to. It was everybody's home, and she would prepare this kind of Jamaican dishes. But after she passed away in 2014, that kind of like my dad will still do it, so it's just like it's not grandma's though. So
what do you think, and you spoke to this a little bit already, has best prepared you to be on city council?
So I think that's best prepared for me for what it was guidance and mentorship. So Ward 5 really does a unique job. By unique, I mean a really good job of kind of wrapping their arms around the community. I mean, I love Ward 5 because it's so special in terms of having a historical connection and rooted connections to family. So my mom, her side of the family, grew up in Ward 5, coming from my grandparents who came to Minneapolis in the late 60s. And immediately, right away, like my grandparents got involved in the community. Therefore, my mom and her siblings got involved in the community. But it's so interesting because I always feel like there's always one degree of separation with family connections in the community. There's typically not really any given time where if I'm coming across somebody who's a generation above me or 2 generations above me, that there's not really a connection that I can find. You know what I mean? Or they'll say, oh, I know your family, I know your mom, I know your whoever. And so I think that is what prepared me, because growing up, I was always kind of actively involved in different ways, from canvassing for different people that were running for different races, or for voter registration in 2012, or just, again, being involved in like the Park and Rec through work programs, sports, after school. And so to have that level of support where now that it's me in the race and immediately so many people have jumped up to say, hey, how can I support? Has really kind of prepped me for this. And also I would say just kind of having a background in like from a professional side. As a professional, I'm a contract analyst, so I write policies for life insurance, disability and supplemental health benefits for Voya Financial. And where that kind of translates is understanding like the legal state laws and compliance that goes into writing these policies. And so having a base knowledge of how to write policies, but also knowing how to kind of digest those and get those back to people that won't really read through an 80-page document. You know, and I think that's a big part of communication to the community for the council seat is understanding how to communicate the policies and how they're going to affect specifically your ward, and how that's going to kind of translate for them, making sure they understand what's being said, and so that they are fully, you know, it's fully transparent. So I think that's what kind of prepared me for this seat, and again, kind of taking that time over the last 4 years to kind of make the decision of when was the right time, was I absolutely prepared for this, and then put myself in that position. So.
Thanks for sharing.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're gonna move on to our last two. Our last Minnesota hot sauce is Red Eye hot sauce. Cheers.
Cheers.
Who is your biggest role model?
My biggest role model, that's a great question, and it's actually fitting for today. My biggest role model is somebody. Ooh,
Yeah, no, it's starting to get me too. The water looks real good.
Yeah, it was. It's my grandfather. And it's interesting because he passed away when I was 10. This is my mom's dad, but my grandfather came to Minneapolis from St. Louis with my grandmother. At this point, they had 4 kids. My mom was born here in Minneapolis, but my aunts and uncles were born in St. Louis. And but the reason why is because he was community focused and community based. Today is actually the 21st year anniversary of his passing. And so I just made a post about it, actually, kind of talking about some of the things that he was doing and involved in. I mean, from being one of the first Black executives of Pillsbury and utilizing that to help uplift the community. So it wasn't, you know, this, he wasn't this very loud or he wasn't somebody that needed to be acknowledged. He just understood the plight of the community and wanted to serve the community for, you know, for the better. And as I've gotten older, like I said, he passed away when I was 10, so I only knew him, and my sisters and my cousins only knew him as grandpa.
Yeah.
But, you know, as we gotten older, you start to hear these stories of people that he was even like, I mean, it was interesting to hear from my mom and my aunts, my uncle talk about stories of who would call the house or come up to Minneapolis and visit people like Louis Farrakhan and Dick Gregory, and for him to have such good relationships with some of these other prominent leaders who were big as activists. I just didn't know these things until recently. But to kind of learn that history, I love to learn about history. I love to learn about my history. And so I always feel connected. Whenever I do something that tends to stray away from like community-based work, I always find myself coming back to it, but I always feel like that's a natural guidance to, you know, what I do and why I do it, you know, kind of going back to the idea of purpose. So I just feel like it's a natural space with a mentor who I never really got to have these conversations with, but, you know, absolutely feel connected to. So
thank you for sharing that. How are you feeling?
That's hot. That's hot. You know, it's hard to talk when your mouth is saliving and you know, kind of. But
I'm really sweating over here, for the record.
Yeah, your blood starts to get warm a little bit, but nothing we can't handle. I'm a little bit nervous for the last.
Yeah, are you ready for the last one?
All right.
Okay.
Cheers.
Cheers. Okay. And the last question that I will have for you.
Okay.
What is one thing
Mhm.
that you want our audience to know about you or your campaign?
A great question for a great sauce.
Yep.
About me. Trying to think with my brain starting to.
No, you're so good. I'm going for the water.
Yeah. Me too, actually.
Yeah, we don't have to suffer, Miles. Oh gosh. And there
Well.
the tears go. Whew. Sorry, you're saying?
What I would like them to know about me
Mm-hmm.
is I base my campaign on my family values of honesty, transparency, and accountability.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a community guy. I understand. I listen first, take action, and follow through. Like I mentioned with the bill, with the legislator, with the young people,
Yep.
that was based on listening to a voice, taking action, and completely following through. So that just serves as a prime example of something I've actually worked on to make change. And over that 2-3 years, it wasn't a simple process. We went through many legislation sessions, and but that continuous drive, holding me accountable, holding the team accountable. I'm a family guy, where, as I've talked about, from mentorship, role models, talked about like going my favorite restaurants and why, and all kind of stems back to family. And so, or even my connection to the ward, where people, that 1 degree of separation, the community doesn't feel like neighbors or friends, they feel more like family. Most of the time there's people even in the race that I went to school with. People that are running in other races I'm very close with. I mean, I'm a Minneapolis kid, and it's ironic because that was an after school program that I went through, Minneapolis kids. But, I'm a father. Yeah, I mean, I love the city of Minneapolis. I'm here to fight for change. I'm here to give a fresh perspective on what constituent services looks like, bringing creative and new ideas to public safety. And also with my background from a corporate perspective, corporate America, and organizational leadership, and even a small business owner. Equitable growth solutions, where that's where I think that, especially in a ward like Ward 5 that's been underserved for so long, I'm bringing not only my ideas, and I want the community to understand that I'm very inclusive and I work in collaboration. So ideas get passed through. We want to make sure that we're connecting and sharing these ideas. And I want people to feel safe in the space that they're voicing their ideas, their vision, their concern. Whether you are a resident, a young person, a senior, an organizational leader, a faith leader, business owner, whatever your connection may be to that ward, the Ward 5, or even the city of Minneapolis, that your voice is valued, it is heard, and we will work together to make change. And my slogan is, our community, our safety, my mission, and I stand on those words every day of the week. So that's what I would say. I would love for the people to kind of learn about me. I'm accessible. When I do connect, I give people my direct contact information. I don't do campaign phone numbers. But I will look to probably separate, campaign from personal as the future, as it goes on, just to make sure that I'm streamlining those connections and kind of separating, who's calling me why. But I think that that's where it gets important. I think that we are in a time, in a space where it's going to be very important to kind of look inward at our local politics. We don't want to get passed by. We want to work together, and I'm here to do that. So that's what I would say. But that actually was very intense. I was not expecting that. 10 out of 10, wouldn't do it again. So,
you heard it right here. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for making it through those 4 and really suffering it through that 4th
Yeah.
one with me. Hey, you weren't crying or sweating as much as I was.
I might be, like, my back and neck, I might have the heat.
Yeah,
So,
you really, like, you feel it, like, in places that you didn't know could get spicy.
yeah, your ears,
Woo!
tonsils, the whole, it's just beyond your, like, palate.
It's mean.
It is, so.
It's really mean. But you made it through. You did it. Thank you for joining us. And we look forward to welcoming y'all back in our next episode.
Thank you for having me.